Welcome, everybody, to a special episode of Screams from the Basement. I am one of your co hosts, Sam. I'm joined, as always, with my co host, Casey. And we have a very special guest on Screams from the Basement today. We have filmmaker Kurtis David Harder, who has a very long and storied career in horror, in modern horror, with a slew of films like Stillborn, Z, What Keeps You Alive, Spiral, Superhost, VHS 94, and his latest horror flick coming to Shudder on May 26th, Influencer. Kurtis, welcome to the show. How are you doing, man?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Congrats on the new movie coming to Shudder on the 26th, as we said. We're very excited for that. Yeah, I guess to start off, let's talk about Influencer. What is Influencer? What influenced it? And just tell us a little bit about it in your own words.
Yeah, I mean, it follows an influencer, as stated, called Madison, who's she's traveling in Thailand, kind of having a bit of a rough trip. She's on the rocks with her boyfriend, and she's kind of feeling a bit isolated and lonely, even though kind of the persona that she's putting online is a very, this is the best trip ever. But then as soon as the camera comes off, we kind of see a little bit more into kind of the turmoil of what's going on in her life. And through that meets this girl named CW, another white girl who's been kind of living in Thailand, and who starts to kind of teach her to put the phone down and kind of live in the moment a little bit more. Start showing her the sights of Thailand and what the country really has to offer. And obviously there's some deeper undertones going on that slowly start to unravel of CW's intentions.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think like Tesh and I, the original origin of the story is I had a trip planned to Southeast Asia, and we kind of always had this idea of when you kind of go across the world and you spend all this time kind of traveling to somewhere where you feel a little bit kind of out of your element, you kind of tend to look for things that are similar or kind of things that you're used to. And so whether that be food or people. So we kind of wanted to subvert that a little bit and play with the idea that the things that might seem safe to us might have some ulterior motives.
That's awesome.
Obviously, we live in a day and age of social media controls the world. It controls like everything we do. I mean, that's how that's how me and Sam met each other, was over social media. I mean, it's just a part of our everyday life. What has been your influence with social media? I mean, you've grown up in the same age we have of, it's just been there. It's been part of our lives for a majority of it at this point. What has been your experience with social media, and how has that kind of influenced the movie?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's such a double-edged sword, because I think like from like the career side of things, like I've met so many people like you guys have met. It's like you meet so many people that you definitely wouldn't have had you not had kind of access to the internet. So my career would definitely look a lot different. And so I'm really grateful for the fact that I came into the industry as Facebook was coming in. It's like I was able to kind of reach out to people that probably would have been inaccessible before. And then, but on the other hand, it is a drug almost, to where we're kind of addicted to it. We're seeing such a rise in like narcissism and just like kind of the ego side of things, where everything's about getting reactions and getting attention. So I think, yeah, it's a double-edged sword. It's for us, for the film, it's kind of exploring kind of that medium and what people are like online and offline, and kind of the issues about it, but not really judging the people, and kind of exploring it through that.
Yeah. So you wrote and directed this one, Influencer, and you've directed before. Most recently was Spiral, correct? So Spiral is a script that came to you, whereas this was something that you co-wrote. Can you take us through the difference of your directorial process when it's a script that you've personally written versus something that you've read and picked up?
Yeah, I mean, they're different. So I think like when you're attaching yourself to something that you've written, there's kind of an inherent, like, very deep seated kind of attachment to it. Whereas Spiral was such a cool experience because it was kind of taking on some other really talented filmmakers' visions of like what they kind of saw. So I think it's a different experience where it's something that you've lived with for so long, and seen the idea evolve from like the very first draft all the way to kind of what you're shooting, versus a script that's kind of very polished and you're kind of jumping into it and putting your own spin on the material. So yeah, they're very different, but at the end of the day, it's like just making sure that you care about what the story you're telling. I think regardless if it comes from you or someone else.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
But very different films for sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
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 So what's been your experience like working with the team at Shudder? Obviously, you've directed Spiral and Influencer now with them, and then you've also produced a number of films, including a couple of Brandon Christensen's, who we have interviewed previously, and he's such a great filmmaker as well. And what's been your experience like from the kind of the post-production side of now your movie's getting released, whether it be Influencer or Spiral or any of the films that you've produced? What's that experience been like, and what is the kind of fanfare been like? Because horror fans are obviously so passionate about what they love, and what especially Shudder has become kind of this hub for horror fans. What has your experience been like from working with them?
I mean, Shudder's been amazing. Like they're just such a godsend for like that platform, because I think like when you look at like the bigger platforms like Netflix, it's like their horror stuff always seems to be like they have some good movies here and there, but it's cool to see like just a group that really cares about kind of what they're putting together and just the kind of films that they curate. So I think like they've only been supportive, and it's been so great that they exist. I think Sam and Emily and the whole team there have been nothing but supportive and amazing.
Yeah. Was Shudder attached to Influencer before or after the conception of it?
This was after they came in, not too long after we finished production on the film. They kind of knew about the project, and then they were supportive of it while we were shooting, and then once we kind of wrapped production, they jumped on board. So it was really cool to kind of see them. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And you guys filmed in Thailand.
Yes.
So what was that like? What was doing a location shoot overseas like? And what difficulties came with it, but also what positives came out of that experience?
Yeah. I mean, so Thailand was really cool. We were there for almost 3 months. We were originally slated to shoot in early 2020, and obviously chaos ensued. And there's about a year where we weren't sure if we were ever going to be able to make the movie, just with the way that it was a tourism movie. Like this is a movie about influencers traveling into foreign places that are very tourist heavy, and kind of like showing the case of kind of all these people kind of descending on Thailand and showing that side of it. So I think like once the pandemic hit, that was a unique challenge, because the country was just so empty. And so by the time we were finally allowed to come, tourism was just starting to pick up again. And so there was kind of this emptiness and isolation that actually we just kind of embraced it with the script, and it kind of lended itself to, I think, actually helping the story, because of the fact that Madison is set to feel so isolated and feeling kind of left alone. And so I think like there were some benefits and negatives, but overall, like Thailand is such an accommodating and friendly country, and kind of moving around the different places was a really cool experience. Yeah.
Were you always planning to shoot in Thailand, or did you plan to shoot in the States first?
This was always a Thailand movie. There's something kind of not just Thailand, but something a little bit magical and mystical about Southeast Asia that I really wanted to try to capture. So when the pandemic first hit, we were like looking at like, oh, do we go shoot this in like South America or kind of like Mexico or some of these countries that were starting to open at the time, because Thailand was very locked down. They were a lot more intense than most countries. And so for us, it was kind of like, well, it's just not really worth doing if you don't capture the kind of that mystical aspect of the landscapes and the culture there. So I think like that to us was really cool and important. And so it was kind of like, if we can't do Thailand or the Philippines or one of these countries, it just wasn't really worth doing for us.
That's awesome. You don't see that a lot where the location is so central to the movie anymore, especially with green screen technology and all that. So yeah. It's awesome that it's awesome you stuck to your guns on that and went Thailand or broke. I love that. That's cool.
It's such a cool place. Like spending some time there in 2019 when we were kind of just doing those early scouts, it was just like, oh man, we gotta figure out how to come back and make this thing. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Is there anything you added to the film after visiting Thailand where you're like, I need to include this because it wasn't in the original?
Yeah, definitely. I'm trying to think of some examples, but I think like when we were writing those first drafts, Tesh actually came over and spent 2 weeks with me, and we were just kind of going to the different places. So I think not that things really changed, but it's just kind of like that whole experience was definitely evocative of like where the script went, because we were kind of writing these scenes as we were in the places we would eventually come back and shoot them. So it was kind of like a part of the process was being like, okay, well, where did the characters go, and how did they kind of navigate the place, because we were doing that exact same trip. So
That's awesome.
Mhm.
So you're no stranger to making movies that deal with social media, screen life. I mean, you could even say like VHS 94 is at least somewhat, it's a precursor to social media, right? The home video market. Superhost obviously deals with influencer culture. So when you went to do this, what was your big angle for making sure you didn't repeat anything from past movies? Because it's a very different beast, this one.
yeah, I think like Superhost has its own, like it's a unique film in that regard, of kind of the Airbnb side of things, and this one is very much about what we portray online and how much you can trust that. And I think that to me was always the interesting thing of the travel angle and the social media side of the things, of what we put online. Is it true to the character, but also is it true, sorry, one second, is it true to kind of, yeah, what is real, like the stuff we see online, is can we trust that? And it's only become, because like when we were making this movie, the technology we use in the film, without getting too spoilery, was really primitive, and we did everything in the film that happens, we did it for real. But with even in just a year or two since we shot the film, like with the advent of like AI technology and like the different things that we're starting to see, it's only becoming more truthful of like what happens in the film is becoming more and more realistic as time goes on, it feels like.
Yeah, it's interesting that you started, I mean, doing some of this stuff in 2019, because back in 2019, I feel like this it's a little,
it wasn't quite possible, but it's getting more and more possible without giving away too much. Like I think within a couple of years we might this might actually happen.
This movie might only grow in intensity and scares. So
it's an interesting time to kind of start to see some of the technology we guessed was coming start to actually be like, oh, this is happening a lot faster than we thought.
And obviously a lot of this technology is a kind of a hot button topic right now, especially in the world of film. You know, we have the writer's strike going on right now. Where do you see the fit for, especially AI? That's what everybody's been talking about lately. Where do you see that fitting into the film industry going forward? You know, like you said, a lot has changed in just 4 years of now people, like, you could probably have an AI write an entire movie. It's probably not going to be very good, but it could happen. Where do you see AI fitting into the world of film going forward?
Well, I mean, as a hopeful filmmaker, I think like just another tool that we can use. As a cynic, it obviously makes you pretty nervous when you start to see just how quickly it's improved from those original, like just the image generation to now, like we're starting to see the video generation. So I don't think we're too far off from just AI generated movies, which is obviously, I mean, but it's coming for all of us and not just the film industry. So it's going to be a curious, I'm excited, equally nervous. It's an interesting time for sure.
Yeah, it's funny because there's a morbid curiosity when it comes to that kind of stuff, but it's also like, it's a little bit like junk food. Like, you know, the further you go into it, the worse it is for you. And so it's interesting.
We're in for an interesting bumpy ride, I think.
So you wear a lot of hats on set, being writer, director, producer, and producers in general just wear a lot of hats. That is that is a kind of fit wherever you go kind of gig. So how do you balance doing all of that, being the writer, being the director, being the producer? How did you balance that, especially on Influencer, where you're literally doing all three?
Yeah. I think for me, it's like I like to be involved in the producing side just because I've been doing it for so long. But it's really having a good team, and we had such a good team over there. Micah Henry and Tesh were both jumping on as producers, and so when you have a good supportive team, then it makes all the difference, and you're able to kind of just, once the shoot starts going, you're able to just focus on the directing side of things as opposed to having to balance that so much. So for me, if I'm directing a film, the producing work really comes in prep and just kind of like making sure everything's coming together. And then once that shoot starts, though, I try not to focus on it too much, have like a meeting a week or something, but really you're there to make the film. So it's a bit of a tightrope balancing act for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this might be a, you go.
Go
Casey.
ahead. Go ahead, Sam.
I was just going to say, this might be a loaded question, maybe not one you could answer, but what do you like better, producing or directing?
I mean, I got into film to direct movies. As a kid, I was directing movies since I was very young. So I think for me, directing would be kind of where I thrive the most and have the most fun. But I think producing is such a cool experience because you're able to kind of support filmmakers you really look up to. Brandon Christians, for example, is such a talented guy, and we make very different films, and it's really cool to be able to be a part of kind of building the films with him. We just actually wrapped his new movie on Friday, and so we're just jumping into post-production on that one. It's going to be really, really cool. So I'm really excited to kind of see how that one goes, and being able to see how different filmmakers also direct, and you kind of are always learning stuff from each other and kind of helping each other and being able to cultivate kind of a cool community, as opposed to if I'm just directing, it can be very insular and you're kind of on your own. So yeah.
What's the biggest thing you've taken away from somebody else's set as a producer and applied towards your own set? Maybe especially on Influencers, or anything you took from working on, Superhost or VHS, and you brought that to this film?
Yeah, I think I mean there's so many little lessons you kind of pick up. It's hard to like jump on one. I think a big thing for me when I was starting out on my first and second movie, like not showing, like I think getting feedback has become such a cool integral part of my process of like from the script to the edit to kind of everything. And I think when I was first starting out, I would just write the script and that was it. And then I would edit the film and that was it. And I didn't really show it to that many people. And then now that you kind of have that community of filmmakers that you trust, that they're going to give feedback that kind of lines up with what you're hoping to do. I think that's been probably the coolest way that has kind of evolved. Influencer was kind of one of the first films I brought on another filmmaker to help edit the film, Rob Grant, who we did a movie Harpoon with, and he just brought so much to it. It was really cool to kind of have that collaborative process of a filmmaker that you really look up to, and I think he's such a talented dude, and having him kind of work in the edit room with me, he brought so much to the film that wouldn't have been there without him. So I think that kind of community aspect of it, of kind of cultivating a group of people that you trust, and listening to them and knowing when to trust your gut and knowing when you might just be holding on to a darling that you got to kill. So
yeah, filmmaking, it seems like it's such a collaborative process, I feel like, and especially we're out here in South Dakota, and our film scene is pretty small, but the group that we have together is pretty cool. It's you work with what you have and the people who are around to support, and a lot of times that's where most of the magic happens. Right? Yeah.
Well, it's similar. Like I think like I'm originally from Calgary, Alberta, which is kind of a bit of a similar vibe. It was when I was in high school, the community was tiny. There was like a couple feature films happening, and you had a few shows like Heartland, and then more and more shows have started to come in, and that community has jumped like hugely. Now they're shooting like Last of Us and kind of all these shows there, and we still shoot our movies, a lot of them in Alberta. So it's cool to see kind of the thread of something really tiny, this small indie community that has blossomed into so much stuff has been shooting there now.
Yeah, I mean, you can't argue with a rap sheet like yours. I mean, there's a lot of like stone cold modern classics on this list. It's awesome.
I was going to say the next thing I want to ask is going back to your history in Canada. What's a young Kurtis filmmaker look like? What got you into film, and what is the first time you picked up a camera and said, "I'm going to shoot this"?
Yeah, I mean, I was just a weird kid. I in kindergarten I wrote down on the career thing film director. So I don't really remember making that choice. It's kind of weird to think about. Like I've just never thought of anything else. So I think like for me, I mean, I started making movies a little more seriously in like middle school. In high school, I started kind of skipping long periods of time to go work on like feature films and stuff. And then kind of right out of high school, directed my first film. So I think like for me, it's just been kind of a part of me since I can remember, and just really enjoyed storytelling and writing and kind of the different processes. So I think it's something, yeah, I'm not really sure what the initial moment. I think when I was like 3, I watched Jurassic Park, and movies are cool. I don't, yeah. Something stuck.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy to think about as a kid. Like you're not thinking about a director, but for you, it's like, no, that's what I want to do, and that's the job title I want. And here you are,
still going.
Still going.
Years later. So yeah, I don't think I grew up. The camera just got a little bit bigger.
That's okay. That's the best type of filmmakers is the ones that are still in touch with that inner kid, you know.
Try to. I mean, I think that's just life. Is we just There's no reason to grow up. Just stay doing what you love. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
I have another follow-up question to that, because like Sam said, there's so much on your resume already. What's been your influence in the horror genre specifically? Like what are the horror movies you grew up watching, and what have you taken from some of those and applied to your own films?
So that's like a really weird question, because when we were starting out, like I didn't watch a lot of horror movies growing up. I watched a lot of movies, and I watched some of the classics. Like I saw The Shining, and I was a huge M. Night Shyamalan fan in middle school. Signs terrified me. But it was a genre that I didn't really know. And we did, like, my first movie was a drama, my second movie was a sci-fi movie. And so when we were approached to produce Stillborn, with the team, we knew Colin and Brandon, Chris Ball, the other producer, and I were like, man, we do not know this genre well enough to make one of these movies. So every night when we were in prep, like a couple months leading up to the shoot, we'd watch like 2-3 of the classics and just like really educated ourselves. And through that process, I kind of fell in love with the genre. It was kind of an interesting thing. And that was in my early 20s, where I'd already watched, like, I owned a huge DVD collection, but very few horror movies. So I think for me, it was kind of falling in love with the genre at an older age. And then now it's just been like, really fun seeing kind of all the different films. And
That's awesome. Yeah. I feel like I was a bit of a late bloomer too, as far as horror goes. Like I was the kid, even in like 9th grade, I was the kid like at sleepovers watching through his eyes, because I was like, I don't know, man. So yeah, man, that's awesome.
It's been cool. Yeah, it was cool to kind of discover so many of those classic movies at a later age after such an because I built an appreciation for cinema growing up, but kind of discovering this whole new genre that I just hadn't watched that much of. It was really fun.
Yeah, I've heard like there have been some comparisons like to Hitchcock thrillers with influencer. Is there anything in particular thriller wise that kind of influenced you a little more on that side of things?
I mean, like there's a few movies that we kind of all watched as a group going into the shoot. Like Talented Miss Ripley is obviously a huge inspiration. The kind of the chameleon nature of some of the characters. There's a really great film and a documentary actually called The Imposter that was a huge inspiration, just from an interesting angle of such an interesting character. Definitely worth checking out. Don't watch the trailer if you haven't seen it. Just go watch this movie. It's a very fun ride. But there's a bunch. I mean, Hitchcock is obviously he wrote the rules, and so for us it was kind of like how do we take like a modern take on kind of all of what makes his movies so great. And so I think that was definitely a big one.
That's awesome.
Well, I got one final question, I think, before we wrap this thing up, and it's one I always like to ask because horror fans always love to pair movies together. You always love to do a double feature. You can't just watch one horror movie; you got to watch two, at least two. So, if someone's going to watch Influencer on Shudder, what is the next movie they should watch right after?
I think I think like that's a tricky one. I'm trying to think of what. I know there's a lot of people like to talk about Single White Female.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I think that would probably be the go-to. Those would be good sister films. Yeah.
Heck yeah.
Right on. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So you're producing a new film from Brandon Christensen. Is there anything else on the horizon that you can tell us about?
Yeah, nothing to really like publicly announce yet, but we've got a couple movies in development that are hoping to go pretty soon. Brandon's new one is going to be wild. We're really excited. He's got another movie coming out on Shudder pretty soon called Puppet Man, which you should definitely check out. They just shot that one last year, so they're just wrapping up post-production, so it should be coming out. Don't know the exact date, but it's a really fun one. I've seen a cut of it. It's a real cool movie from him.
Awesome.
And then the new one is, I can't say too much yet, but it's pretty wild. We're pretty excited with what we just shot. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Kurtis, thank you for joining the show. And thank you for talking Influencer. Again, we just want to say that hits Shudder on May 26th.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Kurtis.
Thanks, guys.